What assumptions we have that may not be true might help us to make better informed decisions as voters, as contributors to the public process, to continue to move Kelowna in a more sustainable direction. And John mentioned the Kelowna Sustainability Coalition. That's kind of an emerging coalition that came together after a few recent land use decisions that were being made by the city of Kelowna, just of people who were interested in these issues and wanted to get together and work to promote sustainability of the city. It's not a particularly official coalition at this point, but it is a group of people who share concerns and a desire to move Kelowna in a sustainable direction. So having confirmed Gord's earlier conjecture that professors talk too much, I will introduce the speakers now. So our first speaker this evening is going to be Peter Truch, who's a senior transportation planning engineer and small business owner here in Kelowna. He will be followed by Andrea Craig, who's an assistant professor of economics that we are very happy to have just joined us in the same department as Andrea. And then Gord Lovegrove, who's an assistant professor of, I think we got this thing wrong, Gord. Maybe actually if you just correctly state your label.
Associate Professor of Smarter Growth in the School of Engineering. That's fine, John, no problem.
Okay, just want to make sure we got it right here. All right, so do you have any further comments, John, or do I hand it over to Peter?
Okay. No, absolutely not. Other than the fact I was going to remind everybody that this session is being recorded. Thank you, Joe, for putting that message in the text box. I hope that nobody minds, and we will make it available to people that can't be here with us this evening in the future on ICE's website.
Okay, so then I will hand it over to Peter to be our first presenter this evening.
Great, thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Now, I should say that our panelists tonight, none of us actually work for the city. And so like this is kind of a bit of an outsider's perspective looking in. I first want to acknowledge to all of my city colleagues that are there or that have worked on this plan for the last several years, actually, in terms of gathering data up, starting back in even as early as 2016 in preparation of this plan. A couple of them I've noticed on the screen are here tonight. So again, really appreciate all the hard work and effort that all of you folks have put into this. It's having done several of these master plans myself across Western Canada, I can tell you from an honest perspective that it's absolute yeoman's work to try and pull one of these things together. So first acknowledgement to City of Kelowna staff, transportation staff, and other staff that were contributing to it. I will switch on to a presentation here now. And I think really my sort of slant on this is to kind of try and set the stage for Andrea and Gord in terms of transportation and how transportation kind of affects life, mobility across the city, and some of the visions and realities that I see from my perspective of what the 2040 master plan is going to lead us down over the next 20 years. Now, I also am doing a side-by-side comparison to a very recently released provincial vision with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of this presentation tonight is caveated on the fact that This is very recent, as in like within the last 2 to 3 weeks it's been released. And so we kind of have the benefit of comparing these two side by side, whereas as the Kelowna staff was preparing this, they didn't necessarily have this in mind or in picture. So first caveat in all of this tonight is that we've now been able, just as this document starts to get ready to go to council, have the opportunity to kind of do a bit of a comparison. So a couple of quick facts to kind of get us oriented into Kelowna's mobility just before we get going into that comparison. Couple of documents that are pulled right out of the Transportation Master Plan. The one on the left that you see is the average distance driven per household. And the darker the orange hexagons, the more driving that there is per household on average. The lighter, obviously, less in. So you can kind of see the intensity, as one might expect, starts to happen towards the fringes of the city as people come in and out of the city center core for this, for their goods, their daily activities, work, shopping, play, etc. The one on the right is also another graphic that comes from 2018 fall weekday, and it's the share of passenger trips by mode. So what you can see here is kind of this nice differential of very light color being in other trips, so some sort of new mobility type thing, sort of a hodgepodge collection of a bunch of stuff. The light gray being biking, the medium gray being walking, the dark gray being transit. So what we would refer to as active or sustainable modes, walking, biking, transit, are those points in the gray and subdivided by urban center to rural across our various topologies in the city. And then the two yellow colors are sort of vehicle trips as a passenger and vehicle trips as a driver, lighter and darker respectively. Now, one thing to kind of consider with this is that I just wanted to point out that that's really only the top 50% of the graph. So really it kind of looks like this when we're actually thinking about this in context. And at today's numbers, or 2018, the overall auto mode share is 85% in Kelowna, meaning 85% of trips that are taken within Kelowna are taken by automobile. Now, across the city of Kelowna, 50% of all GHG emissions are come from the transportation sector. So basically people moving about their day and about their business. And in the province, province-wide, 40% of all GHG emissions come from transportation. And really, so the key point to this is that transportation really is the key when we're looking at environmental aspects in terms of reducing our GHG emissions, trying to get to net zero, and meet both federal and global goals included in, say, the Paris Agreement, for instance, and some of the stuff that just came out of Glasgow just recently. Okay, a little bit of a delay there, apologies. All right, so the side-by-side comparison. As I go through the next few slides, you're going to see the Transportation Master Plan statistics or salient points on the left-hand side of the screen, and on the right-hand side of the screen, the provincial BC Clean BC Roadmap to 2030. So these are the two documents that we're going to be doing this side-by-side. All right. On the left, you'll see the 12 goals, or otherwise known as pillars, that are targeted within the Transportation Master Plan. And you can see they range a wide variety of things. ranging from improving travel choices, ensuring value for public investment, improving safety, improving health, protecting the environment. I mean, there's the whole list of them is on the screen there. So I without spending a whole lot of time on this, what I can sort of say is that from a holistic standpoint, the city is really trying to look at transportation from a balanced perspective and make sure that all of these goals and targets are met. On the right-hand side, what we see is the roadmap to 2030, where the Clean BC plan is trying to reach net zero by 2050. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term net zero, what that means is that we won't be increasing the same amount of GHG emissions that are being emitted are maintained by 2050. This was taken out of the Clean BC plan, so I can't take credit for it. But I really kind of look at this type of model in terms of ways to reduce GHG emissions, similar to the old adage of reduce, reuse, and recycle for materials. The first step in this is reduce. So try and minimize the amount of stuff that you consume to begin with. That's the green bar shown at the top, number one, about actually reducing the amount of emissions altogether. The reuse is to try and again continue. It's a bit of a hybrid between that reduce with mode shift and improving the vehicle efficiency for that component. And then the recycle component is, well, we're not actually changing the amount of energy use, but or the amount of energy use, but you're changing the form in that. And so that's those two blue bars on the bottom. So if you remember back to your school days, the primary pillar in all of this wasn't actually recycle, although that's what we all do now. The primary pillar in terms of trying to reduce waste was actually reduce altogether. And so what I'm going to focus on are particularly elements and ways that the Transportation Master Plan kind of links towards that. Now, if you remember, I said a while ago that this graphic was going to be quite important, looking at the average household. And here's the reason why. Reducing distances is one of the first ways that we can try and achieve a GHG reduction. Now, you can see that, again, the darker orange was all much higher trips sort of in our periphery, as opposed to the urban core. Interestingly, McKinley didn't appear on this map, and so I would question what that ended up being at. I'm imagining it's a sample size or something like that. That probably didn't make it statistically valid to show on the graph, but at any rate, this will come into play. So let's take a look into reduced distance traveled into a little bit further. So with the Kelowna plan, the vision is a target of a 20% average distance driven by 2040 or in 2040, which is great. It's a fantastic goal. Unfortunately, the reality of this is that even with the 20% average distance reduced, we will still see an increase of 10% of kilometers traveled in total over distance increasing. So if you remember, when we're trying to compare back to that net zero reality or that net zero target in 2050, the unfortunate reality of this is even with a fairly good vision, it still is going to result in increased number of trips by 2040. And when you compare that to Clean BC, which is requiring or targeting 25% average distance driven reduction by 2030, we can see that there's quite a difference between the two sets of plans. I did mention these bottom parts here, 3, 4, and 5. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this tonight. Number one, for time efficiency, but second of all, it is mostly in the provincial realm. And while there are some things that the city can do, it's not really in the wheelhouse of city government to try and address a lot of these. It has to come from a provincial or federal level. And so in moving forward in ways to reduce GHG emissions, I really am going to focus on the second component and kind of stop there of increasing mode shift. So back to the plans. Transportation master plan set some really ambitious visions, and I think they're absolutely fantastic. Doubling transit usage percentages and quadrupling biking. That sounds like a heck of a lot. And the reality is that it may be tough to even achieve that. But what this results in is a 75% auto share by 2040. And that is the target that is stated in the TMP. That 75% auto target by 2040 unfortunately doesn't come anywhere close to the provincial targets that were just set out. Those are now on the screen there of 70% by 2030, 60% by 2040, a 15% difference over the TMP, and 50% by 2050. That's what's going to help get us to that net zero target that Clean BC is trying to achieve. We delve into that mode share a little bit more. This is another table that comes out of the TMP in terms of driving mode share by area. Okay, and you can see these lower 4 here really struggle to do much in terms of change. And unfortunately, when we start to delve into those lower 4 there a little bit more in 20 years' time, they really correlate with those long distance trips and those suburban areas on the fringes of the city. So I think the question really starts to become, what is it that we can do to do better and try and start changing our overall transportation plan? Just a little bit of a framework for tonight. I'm going to set this up for our next 2 speakers, but this is looking at the whole system. Mobility and transportation is actually one component for sustainable living. And one of the key statements in this entire document is that the layout of a city has a significant impact on transportation. It also has a significant impact on affordability, livability, health, and all of those other targets that we set in there. And that's why it's so important to try and achieve all 12 of those goals that were set out in the TMP. Let's take a look at the value proposition of funding. Okay. Can we do better? What you can see in this excerpt from the Transportation Master Plan document is that compared to current funding levels, the city is planning to increase funding across every element across the board. The gray bars show the current funding, the blue bars show proposed funding. And so this all should be good news. We're really looking to invest heavily into mobility and making sure that we're getting good value and good mobility for all of our citizens within Kelowna. Let's focus on these 2 first. Transit and biking / multimodal corridors. So the transit component and the active modes component being walking and biking. Okay. Transit, for a 70% increase in funding, we're looking to double the mode share, which is pretty ambitious, but I think reasonably achievable. For biking, we can look at a 60% increase on funding and actually achieve 4 times the mode share, according to the TMP. Even better, right? Really good value for money, especially for the extra investment. Fortunately, the road connections also come in here, and these are new or widened roads for existing. And there's a 225% increase in funding in the next 20 years. And it's for what benefit? So this slide shows an excerpt of the roads projects that are proposed as part of this transportation master plan. And I've highlighted some of these ones on the fringes, which accounts for roughly 3/4 of all of the road projects in the city that are proposed over the next 20 years. And it's quite interesting when you look at those and then you do an overlay of the average distance driven per household, you'll see that in terms of the benefit, it's really only benefiting those that are already driving significantly and will and are some of the reason why it leads to that increased total travel number. Okay. And we can see that through the city's forecasted prediction that really the mode share split in these areas really isn't changing over the next 20 some years. So the vision and the reality. Overall, I think the Kelowna Transportation Master Plan has really good vision. There's lots of goals that are incorporated in here that seem to have good potential to achieve. And again, I want to repeat, a huge thank you to all city staff who have worked on this project. But I take a slightly contrarian view where I think that perhaps we can do better. And the vision on these 4 particular goals of ensuring value for public investment, improving health, enhancing travel affordability, and protecting the environment are probably quite lacking in this plan. And I think that there are a lot of things that we can do to try and push this plan to do better. The reality is that we're not really coming anywhere close to meeting these recently released provincial targets for GHG reduction and in trying to help the environment. We're increasing our total GHG emissions in the city of Kelowna over today's amount. And by doing so, we're continuing to put our environment, climate change, and all of these floods, fires, and things that we've been dealing with and severe weather events from more frequent risk. It also puts our overall health of our population at greater risk as well as we sit in vehicles for longer and longer periods of time. The reality is that we're putting a significant amount of investment into infrastructure with very little return, in my opinion. And finally, the grand result of this is that we're actually decreasing travel affordability for many residents in Kelowna, focusing on making them focus on reliance on vehicles, private vehicles for transport. And so I come to the conclusion that there are things that we can do better, and I would love at the end of this forum to have a discussion with everybody about how we can try and do things a little bit better. John, back over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. So now, how do I close your screen? Stop participant sharing. It looks like I can take charge and do that. So, okay, thanks, Peter. We do want to leave lots of time for questions. So I think we'll just move straight on to Andrea right now. And Andrea, if you are able to start your presentation, that would be great. Thank you. If you're starting to speak, Andrea, you're probably muted. Oh, you're there now? Good.
Okay, here now. So I'm also talking about Kelowna's Transportation Master Plan, which is why we're all here, commenting on some different things, but meant to complement and echo what Peter's saying. So I'm an assistant professor of economics, and as background about me. I've lived in 4 different cities in Canada, and across different cities had private vehicle, cycling, and transit, and walking as my primary modes of transportation. So coming at this as an economist, but also someone who's used different modes of different transportation depending on the city. And John and Peter earlier were talking about how, or Gordon, John were talking about how academics talk too much. I'll also preface this by saying I think academics are inclined to be critical or constructively critical. So that's kind of what the focus will be. I'll be focusing on what I like in the plan, but also areas I think for improvement. So just caveating with that. So the first thing that came to mind in this transportation plan is what should we be measuring? And so the objective is to be switching modes from primarily driving to active transportation and public transportation. But there's some other measurements in the transportation master plan. One is affordability, and they look at it as housing and transportation costs as the 2 largest costs for many households. So they think about housing affordability as the combination of housing and transportation costs, which I think is fantastic. This is actually how I've modeled things in my own research, and I think it's the right measure. So someone can, it might be worthwhile to pay more in rent and live closer to where you work and everything you need, or most things you need in a week, instead of paying lower rent and having to pay higher transportation costs. This could be both time and financial. So looking at this measure of affordability as both housing and transportation costs make a lot of sense. It also focuses on our mentions inclusive transportation, and they have 2 measures for that. The percentage of low-income residents that live within a 5-minute walk of frequent public transit. And this is actually a walk on existing streets, which makes sense. But it's not whether low-income residents or residents live close to a public transit stop. It's really, will that public transit get them to where they need to go or want to go? So where do low-income residents need to get to work, to buy groceries, for recreation, and where else do they want to go? And how long does it take on public transit to get there? So really, public transit is a network. It's not, are we in proximity to a stop? It's how long will it take to get to a place on the public transit network? And then similarly, for cycling, there's a measure of the percentage of low-income residents within 400 meters of a primary cycling route. And I would argue it's really about the cycling network. Is there a safe and straightforward way to get to where people want to go on their bicycles? So is there a network of bicycle routes to get between residential locations and work locations, groceries, other necessities, and recreational areas? So these definitions both focus on proximity, and I would argue we need to be focusing on the networks. Okay, so the transportation plan talks about quick build infrastructure, and they say it's less expensive than building permanent infrastructure, and it's also quicker to install. So they talk about quick build infrastructure for active transportation, which means bicycle routes and pedestrians or pedestrian areas. So, and they talk about concrete barriers and planter boxes for cyclists. My concern, or yeah, I guess my concern would be that that doesn't shift to cones or lines on the road. And so that even if things are built with quick build infrastructure, that there's still safety for cyclists and pedestrians. And then in terms of neighborhood support, as long as the quick build infrastructure isn't a barrier to neighborhood support for these active transportation routes. Where I think quick build infrastructure would make the most sense is for a rapid transit line or rapid transit on Harvey. So they talk about transit dedicated lane. In previous literature, the city refers to bus rapid transit. So bus rapid transit is a dedicated lane for transit. It's still a bus, but you can get very quick or fairly quick public transit times if you have a dedicated lane for public transit. So in one of the previous reports, they say bus rapid transit costs $3 to $14 million per kilometer. It's about 12 kilometers from downtown to UBCO, which is the proposed route. But that's assuming that we need to build another lane. So it's an additional lane for bus rapid transit was my reading of it. And as an economist, I would question what's the best use for the lane that's currently there. So instead of having an HOV lane, you could have a bus rapid transit lane. It would still require some quick build infrastructure. It would still require changes to signaling, but it would be a fairly quick and a less expensive way to add in that dedicated lane and be able to improve public transit times. And if we improve public transit times, then people are more likely to switch from driving to public transit. So I think this is one of the ideal quick builds, because buses don't need protection from vehicles. We just need to keep private vehicles out of a dedicated transit lane. And then this is not as related to transit, but they mention the quick builds of patios during COVID. So I think during COVID, it was a great policy that both that Kelowna and many other cities implemented quickly to allow restaurants and specifically small businesses to have patios outside, whether indoor seating was restricted due to policy or just to spread people out and encourage people to be eating outside or have the possibility to eat outside. It was a great response by the city for public health and to support small businesses. I think it's exactly the right thing to be questioning whether we should be using public space for on-street parking, or if there's another use for that public space that's better. I'm I'm not a fan of proposing patios, permanent patios or long-term patios without any mention of the city renting them out at some fair market rent. So if public space is going to be dedicated to private businesses, then I think that should be rented to private businesses. And there's a lot of mention of the budget in the transportation master plan. So this is would be a very small dent in that, but we should be thinking about not switching from giving away public space for free parking to giving away public space for businesses, but what's the best public use for that space. And last is what's missing. So we're thinking about transit in 2040, which is almost 20 years away. I would argue that we should be thinking about congestion fees at some point. So we're going to have this transition from gasoline powered vehicles to electric vehicles for greenhouse gas emissions. That's great. But it's going to reduce the per kilometer cost of driving, and reducing the per kilometer, the variable cost of driving is going to encourage people to drive more. So that will potentially make congestion worse. The other thing going on is fuel taxes are collected and then redispersed to the city as gasoline powered vehicles are replaced with electric vehicles. There's going to be a decrease in that revenue. So I think Kelowna really needs to think about eventually having congestion fees that apply during peak times. So these would be fees to drive within certain areas of the city. And if they were applied during peak times or had a higher rate during peak times, then that would encourage people to decrease how much they drive. But it would also encourage people, if they were going to make a trip, but they didn't really mind when they did it, they would switch from a peak time to another time with a congestion fee. So it's going to smooth out our trips throughout the day or throughout the week. And so we have less congestion during peak times. And then in terms of technology change, the transportation master plan talks about technology change a lot, but I think it underestimates how electric bikes are going to be able to increase the range of cyclists. And if things are set up, then I think people in suburban neighborhoods would be inclined to switch to electric bicycles as well, in terms of distance and in terms of helping with the hills. So thank you for your attention, and thank you to John, Janmaat, and ICER for organizing.
Thank you, Andrea. Certainly always appreciate a little bit of economics thrown in, and particularly by someone who knows more about this topic than I do. So finally, we'll be over to Gord Lovegrove, and after that, we'll open it up for Q&A, and we should have then at least a half hour to see what these people can tell us to the specific questions we may have. Anyhow, now over to you, Gord. And you might be muted, Gord, if you're already trying to talk.
That's what I forgot to do before I turned on my slideshow. My apologies, people. Welcome. So let's learn from some ancient wisdom here. The TMP has a vision. So that's not the vision I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is there's different learners out there, and we want to learn from what works. There's a concrete style of learning. So let's actually, there's different kinesthetic learning, different people that can talk about abstract learning. There's people that need to see some examples. How can we achieve a better comparison between what the TMP division is proposing and what the BC Clean BC is saying we need to do? So what we did is we're going to have a really, and I say 10 minutes, despite the fact we probably have been a little bit beyond 10 minutes each. So I've got a lot of slides. I can cut this short. So Mr. Moderator, John, just give me the heads up if I ramble on, because as both speakers before me have said, I speak too much, clearly. So we're in a crisis, a climate emergency, climate crisis, whatever you want to call it. And if you study any Asian languages, Mandarin talks about two characters, danger and opportunity, that comprise the word crisis. If we don't change, if we don't work together to reduce our emissions, congestion, obesity, crashes, costs, address health issues, we're going to perish as a human race. So what we're faced with now is an opportunity to retrofit. We're coming out of COVID. We're coming out of some recent issues, especially down the coast, the rebuilding. We're getting to the point now where with smoke and floods and drought, the pain of not changing has become greater than the pain of changing. So we're really in the midst of a tension. It's called, can we change culture? How do we do that? We need, in the words of the IPCC report, drastic action. So one of the things we have to do is realize the key to a resilient community, one that can recover from disaster events like we've been going through, is a sense of community. We need as a team to work together. We got to come together. I've been hearing many good reports on CBC about the city of Merritt and what a sense of community they have and how they're going to rebuild and they're coming back together, and how much they appreciate each other and how much they've been helping out. So in our case, we want to age in place gracefully. We want to enjoy our city of Kelowna. We can do smarter. We can learn from that historic wisdom. We can be smarter in the way we talk about going forward and recovering and retrofitting. And so one of the things I have been researching and teaching, just freshly minted PhDs, is on smarter growth. And what's a smarter growth community? Well, very simply, from the most simplistic things, it begins with a human scale of blocks. City blocks go together and make up a city. It's a survey. The streets go here, the parks go here, the schools go there, the community centers and houses go here. Well, if we talk about a city, we start with a human scale that are walkable blocks, as opposed to planning for cars. We're planning for people, walkable, mixed use, within walking distance, with safer, lower speed limits. The human body can't absorb anything of significant speed, so we're looking about lower mass, separating travel streams by speed, direction, mass. So pedestrians, slower, lighter, stay out of the way of cars. And so you can see here parks, neighborhood parks, lots of predominant parks, and some of the nicest neighborhoods around the world that we've been learning from, ancient wisdom, have a lot of green space. The other thing that we've discovered in looking at smarter growth is it got a lot less delays and crashes. So for example, 80% less congestion when you're using roundabouts, serious crashes go down similar amount, and an overall, from a modular perspective, so we go back to this diagram, about 60% safer in terms of overall crashes in the neighborhood, not just on the major roads and at intersections. So we've got health benefits, we've got community benefits. You still need to, though, if you're walking a lot, how are you going to get between neighborhoods across the city or between communities? And so we really need high quality transit. So thank you, Andrea, for talking about that as well, and where our investments need to go to have successful aging in place, access to our neighbors, to our services, to our parks. But so there's a lot of text on this slide, so I'm just going to draw your attention to a few things. Clearly, we're in a climate crisis, right? We got poor air quality. And as Peter's already pointed out, our vehicles, our transportation habits, Canada's car capital are leading to 50% of those emissions. We need to recover. We need some better ways to recover. And what we've been seeing happening in the coast and elsewhere, people can't drive. There's not going to be recovery. So we got to use other means to recover quicker. And we need to also think about a reputation. I've got anecdotes. More and more of my friends, neighbors, cousins who want to come to Kelowna to vacation are saying it's full of congestion. It's a parking lot in the summer. Our prosperity backbone is at risk. So how are we going to retrofit our community so we have more of a sense of community? As Andrea's pointed out, it's got to be a system, a well-integrated system for all people, not just cars. The website, Engineers and Geosciences of BC, just a lot of my shots in here will be cribbed. Clearly, we are car culture. North America's car culture. We can do better though. So let's go to some real world, some of these examples, whether they're concrete or grass or whatever, but visual examples that I've been in, and I'll introduce a few of these for you. I'm going to leave Carmel, Indiana for you to interview yourself or Google yourself to take a look, but there's equity, there's tourism, a lot of similarities between these communities. And then I'll also talk about a couple of examples in terms of recovery. Now, this whole talk is being recorded. So if I'm going fast, it's so that we can leave more time at the end for discussion. So I apologize, but pause the video where you want to take a look at some of these slides. Delft. 500 to 1,000-year-old community in the Netherlands, built next to water, just like Okanagan, a university town, big city problems, and it's a global leader. So this red triangle I just drew on the screen, you can see it. There it is there, the historic city center. But now you've got Delft University here down. So a university town very much. There's been tons of growth, as you can tell. And hey, they even have, I think John before the meeting said, IKEA. We were talking about IKEA. They even have big box. I want to also point out something in this little area down at the bottom of the screen, and that is they have intercity zero emission regional tram trains as well. And you can see they have roundabouts, one of my favorite topics. Tram lines going right through the center of a roundabout. Where are all the big gates and the bells and the flashing lights? This is integration without barriers at low speed, separating people in time and space properly. And this red around here is a bike path. So there's ways to do it. And the Dutch have figured out ways to do it. And they have a climate similar to ours. Again, you can tell I've cribbed off the internet. They have a car culture. They're richer than we are. They love cars. They're a caraholic like me, but they also have convenient alternatives. So they have choice. This is their downtown. Their city hall is this building, and underneath, this is the train station. Underneath it, they have bike parking. They have a bike path, well integrated. This is their bank and commercial district here, buses. The tram line is right there. And what's wrong with this picture? Look at this canal. Look at this bike path. The bike path is at or below the water level. What's with that? On average, the Netherlands is built 10 feet, 3 meters below sea level. Forget about water concerns, people. If the Dutch can do it, they are world experts. Their first national ministry with waterworks and diking. We can certainly, in a city with the lakes and the rivers and the greenways, we can work around that as well. Their underpasses, that's the other thing, talking about bicycling. They have underpasses where you gain momentum going down into it, you maintain that momentum to get up the other side as opposed to overpasses. So there's some suggestions on that. It's safe, sustainable, supportive, and there's beautiful ambience. Of course, they have overpasses, but their ramps up are like 2%, a fraction of what you see in our overpasses, because they want to promote these alternative modes for all ages, all abilities, right? And as Andrea said, e-bikes is going to really, they've turned the corner on e-bikes. You see a lot of them there, and we expect to see here, to the point where there's a gender, women dominate the cycling, moms, kids, and seniors. I'm getting up here, I'm 62, are also avid cyclists. They say, they have a saying over in the Netherlands, Bikes allow you to get closer to a door-to-door trip than even walking. Because if you're hobbling, if you've got a bum knee, as my mom used to say, sometimes you need a wheelchair or a walker. You can't bike, whereas in a bike, you can get door to door. So again, and now let's talk about investment. Andrea, I really appreciate the setup there. The calculations from the Dutch show that $1 invested in active transport infrastructure yields $35 in socioeconomic benefits, talking about health, greenhouse gas reductions, improved safety, air quality, and decongestion. If you want more on this, there's some great videos out there, quick studies. As I've already pointed out, I love roundabouts. So hey, what's a presentation from Lovegrove without a roundabout? And so they do reduce not just delays, but if you can reduce the delay, you also reduce greenhouse gas emissions on major and what's important, minor roads. So for major roads, they developed a roundabout called turbo roundabouts. We're actually researching that to produce the first North American turbo roundabout design manual in North America. Like us, the Dutch have been tempted by cars, yet they continue to put community first. So here's the green is cycling, dip down, and with car cultures coming back up, they've got walking now where they've got sidewalks and pedestrian areas, car-free downtowns, and public transport has come and gone, but you can see it's still there. It's just that they've got lots of alternative ways. They've got a beautiful continuous cycling network in most cities. This happens to be the city of Utrecht. And car use is about the same, somewhere in the 30% plus or minus range. Let's come closer to home. Boulder, Colorado, North America. We love cars in North America, right? Award-winning, happiest city in North America, bicycle capital, awards from the Wheelmen of America Cycling Association, and yet very similar to Kelowna in socioeconomics, layout, sprawl, mountains nearby, population about 100,000, 110,000, lots of growth, tourism economy, university town, and yet even here, they have done stuff to promote more use of transit and cycling and active transportation modes, including the U-Pass, which we have at UBCO. They've also got something called the neighborhood or NICO Pass, U-Pass. We did a research here at UBCO with the city of Kelowna showing a 75% uptake neighborhood by neighborhood is the potential. Nothing mentioned of that in the TMP, and I would suggest we look at that for the city of Kelowna to achieve its climate change targets. They also have a really exciting and interesting and tourist-oriented series of bus services. So take a look if you got a chance at the city of Boulder and what they've done. Like I said, this is a quick flyby. Their investment has been significant, and they also have a target to reduce single occupant travel to 25% of trips. I'd be very interested to know what the city of Kelowna's SOV is, but they've seen 20-year trends despite 10% or over 10% growth. Pedestrian volumes about 10%, cycling has increased, transit has tripled, and auto drivers slash passengers dropped 10%, and SOVs have dropped down to 50%. So they're not quite at 25, they're still going, but they're making significant progress. And you can see all the quality of life improvements. They're winning awards. Corporate headquarters, like I believe it was Microsoft, have moved to Boulder. I've been there. They got a car-free downtown, fantastic microbreweries, a thriving economy, and a protected environment. Just to recap where we're going with all this, the reputation and retrofit examples, what I've been focusing on to this point, and we really want sustainable equity, all ages, all abilities. That's the only way we're going to get that mode split down, because right now we are the car capital of Canada, and we have rich seniors. We need to make a case that's safe for them, inviting and convenient for the very young, the very old, everybody in between. So we talked about Delft, we talked about Boulder, Carmel, Indiana. I just want to say that with roundabouts, they don't need power for signal lights or anything like that. they can operate without power, and so they're a key resilience infrastructure item. And so maybe we need to think about more roundabouts in Kelowna and understand that partnerships and leadership, as Peter said, play a significant role. So let's talk about partnerships and how key and how do we recover from events, whatever those might be. And Hurricane Katrina was a significant event. Many of you remember that, 2005. And of course, right now, we've just had the third atmospheric river come through the South Coast. I've got family down there. I'm sure many of you do. And what's going on? We've already got stories coming out of there of recovering. With Katrina, basically a deferred infrastructure project basically caused $151 billion worth of damage. And a levee was overcome, just like we saw. If you've been looking at reports down on the South Coast, happened. A levee was too low, got overrun and flooded. And unfortunately, it was lower income areas that were hit the hardest. It's taken over 10 years to recover. So some lessons learned. I think everybody agrees, and even council has started instituting an infrastructure levy. We have to get to those needed infrastructure investments. And I've bolded start that because trade-offs are involved. What is truly needed? Where do we want to go for the future for a system-based, equitable, all ages, all abilities, inclusive recovery? And rail resilience. In the case of Hurricane Katrina, I actually have a 20-minute video I use in my railway engineering classes with my students. The BNSF, the rail, and that's what this is, a rail bridge is about a mile long. And it might look like, oh my goodness, but rail got in first. The railways brought in the first power, communications, food, clean drinking water, and got recovery going before the highways were rebuilt. So the US Army Corps of Engineers went to the Netherlands, learned from the Dutch on how to do better with their levees and flood protection. In Kelowna, we have flooding too. In South Coast BC, of course, this is a picture, again, off the internet, one of the stories, the many, many stories, the red arrows showing the highway that has been washed away by the yellow area arrows indicating the mud flows. I mean, we had a 100+ storm event of over 3 times the precipitation. All of that came together at the same time. Perfect storm. And horrible coincidence that all the flows of hydrology from the basins, and Anna, you can back me up or correct me, but they came together enough simultaneously that the outflows were so massive. Engineers, hydrologists had never seen something like this before and overcame highways, creeks, bridges. We have to think about that and how we design detention, retention, storm retention or detention areas, how we design our highway drainage systems so they're not overcome. And in this, even in this case, South Coast, we had motorists stranded between the mud flows, right? And how were they rescued? You might remember VIA had brought in a train because the rail recovered the first, same thing here, to get them out safely to needed food, shelter, and services. So I guess lessons that have been learned so far. Partnerships and leadership are key, working together. We need to move to be proactive in our stewardship of our infrastructure. We can no longer defer. We got to get to them and to the needed. So there's going to be some tough, but very important leadership decisions, strong leadership needed. How we manage our growth. Do we still want to build on floodplains, on hillsides, next to lakes and riparian zones and creeks? We need to recover and reconnect and be ready. And that's the key to resilience, so that we get our transport, we get reconnected to each other, we get our clean water. Princeton was shut down because it lost its water, well, Merritt actually, its water and sewer, and Princeton, same idea. Getting power and obviously communications, emergency medical services, those are critical for recovery. We know a lot of this, we're working on a lot of this. The opportunities post-COVID, the Prime Minister's been here. People are stepping up, coming together. They've struck an infrastructure recovery committee. I'm hoping to somehow have input into that for the rebuild so that we see this never happen again. We're going to get hit with events. What do we do to minimize the damage and maximize recovery and resiliency? And so zero emission vehicles, transit, net zero building codes, all of that should be on the table, including regional zero emission intercity passenger tram trains. I've been working on this one. Anybody that knows me understands my passion for regional intercity trains, because you know what, you can get people walking in neighborhoods, but if they can't get across the city or across a region without driving, they're going to stick to driving. It's the most convenient. So our reputation, so recommendations for, or my vision for Kelowna, a sustainable quality of life for Canada's tourism mecca is we need a reputation that we're looking at smarter growth management. And we know that'll get us a 50% greenhouse gas reduction. So again, you know, Peter, you set us up. You said it's not just about transportation, it's integrated. Andrea talked about a system. Absolutely, land use and transportation together. Resilience, a tram train, not just a train, not the traditional via or even freight train, we're talking tram train. This is technology coming out of Europe. It's brand new. There's a paper I'm about to publish in the Canadian Journal of Civil Engineering, and it's being talked about as a demonstration project in the Fraser Valley. So you may see it down in Vancouver before you see it here. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Certainly, there are many ways cost effectively, as Andrea's pointed out, to reduce our emissions, to reduce our use of the vehicle, and to increase transport equity. And that is a picture from taken from just a snapshot from one of our videos on something I've been harping on, and I guess, you know, people that know me understand where I'm coming from on this. Down at the bottom is the paper that's been submitted to the Canadian Journal for publication. We're expecting comments back. And that's the title, the techno-economic feasibility. With powered axles, tram trains can go up and down on any grades and around any curve that Highway 97 is. The problem is we don't know exactly where it's going. That's subject to engagement, community by community. And of course, it's going to require partnerships at the provincial and federal level. I'm not throwing this out here to say, Kelowna, you got to do this. But let's look at some basic facts here. Number one, the equity. It's for ecotourists, commuters, youth, seniors, those that choose not to drive, those that can't drive. The community value in terms of resiliency. Remember, I talked about recovery, rail recovery, safety, getting cars off the road, increasing our tourism reputation, decongestion, and reductions in climate change and travel time. Benefit cost ratio exceeds 3 to 1 and actually up to 7 to 1. It's just, I'm trying to be conservative because it sure seems amazing. Compare that to the cost of just one lane widening, Highway 97, $4 billion. It is crazy. It's about a quarter of the cost of what it's going to be taking. And as you know, Highway 97 widening has been an issue for many, many decades, a lot of community opposition, whereas rail using, and this is a graphic you'll see in the background of embedded rail. So barrier-free, shared lanes, just like buses that use the HOV lane now. This slide, just take a look at the top right corner. That's not my graphic. That's actually the train that's been operating in northern Germany for 3 going on 4 years now. That's an Alstom Island Creatia. It's a zero emission run by hydrogen, zero emission regional passenger train. We don't need density. When you're talking about the kind of construction you're talking about there, the cost of rail is in the 2 to 5 million per kilometer. This is not a SkyTrain that's $150 to $200 million per kilometer. It's less expensive, a quarter of the cost of building highways, folks. So in terms of next steps on this project, clearly I'm recommending that the Transportation Master Plan needs to allow for it. I have been talking to the city planners. They appreciate station locations in the longer term. This is probably something that I would expect has been thought about by city staff, but they see it as beyond 20 years. I'm suggesting maybe it's time to pull it in and start planning a little sooner. And that is it, everyone. I apologize. I don't even know what time it is, but I tried to get to 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes max, so we have time for discussion. So John, back to you, sir.
Okay.
I'm hearing a sigh. I apologize. How bad was it?
Well, we were going to have 10 minutes each, and I think in total, we managed to get an average of 20 minutes each. So anyhow, yes, some questions. So people who are attending, it would be great if you can put questions in the chat, and I can kind of manage them a little bit and try and make sure we get as many questions in as possible. But before we do that, if there's any, just very briefly, and the emphasis on the word briefly, if any of the panelists, particularly Andrea and Peter, who have now heard everybody else's presentations, would like to make a few comments that were inspired by others' presentations, please do so. And I see, Andrea, you turned your mic on, so go ahead.
Thank you. So Gord mentioned compass, and I'm not sure if it was in reference to a compass card, but that is something that was in the transportation master plan of some card that's easy to take public transit. I'm holding two that I always have, one for Ottawa, one for Vancouver. So first of all, it would make it easier for people to take public transit. You just reload them, you don't have to carry cash. I think the other benefit would be the data that comes out of that. So knowing not necessarily where people are coming from and where they want to go, but what routes people are taking. And that would be data that could be then used to improve public transit schedules later. So that's fairly minor, but I think something that would be really helpful.
And Peter, do you have anything you'd like to add quickly?
No, I'm keen to hear from everybody else, but I will just jump in and say, I think Compass was actually not Compass, but Compass is in the community pass, correct, Gord?
Yeah, actually, TransLink stole it from me, Andrea. FYI, I did the first study in Vancouver at UBC. Then I did a similar study up in Kelowna, and it is meant to stand for Community UPass. TransLink, I think, literally does say it's Compass. So it's spelled the same. That's why I use the capitalized PASS. Very good pickup, though. You're absolutely right. I've got a Compass card too for Vancouver as well, by the way. Go for it. Yeah, let's hear from people. And Google's in Boulder. So thanks for that, Anna. I saw that.
Okay. So Laura Prada wonders about investments and plans to educate people. So we've talked a lot about infrastructure and what we build and such. But what about teaching people? So those of us who don't cycle a lot, well, I cycle a lot, but other people don't cycle a lot, are often very intimidated by cycling in traffic. What do we do? And likewise, drivers don't know what to do sometimes with cars, with cyclists, and end up putting people in danger without intending to. What sort of plans would there be? What sort of investment would be needed on the educational side that would be part of getting us to these wonderful goals of substantially increasing cycling?
Well, the city does have a very good program to promote active transport, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but I think it was active something, and there are a lot of things on their website and their programming, city and the parks, where they do this, and they're trying to get the word out. I actually aspire to a design philosophy called self-educating design. If you've got a pathway, so Karen, my significant other, will not bike in a bike lane on Springfield, but she will go on the Abbott Street cycle track, the path that's off the road. And the research is pretty clear. If you want all ages, all abilities, and even longer trips, it's got to be separated off the road. It can't be mixed with traffic. And so that's self-educating, John. So I think it's got to be a system, a good approach in terms of design, a good communications crew. The city has fantastic communications staff. And of course, tours. I teach a course called Go Global, where I'll take industry professionals, community leaders. I've taken city staff before, as well as my students, to the Netherlands, the places I've got pictures from in this presentation. So it's got to be a combination. People also need to be responsible for their own actions. So parents need to teach their children and so forth. And I think even partnering with vendors, like I was looking at an e-bike, and they talk about courses and making sure their customers that buy these things understand the rules of the road and how to use them properly. So it's going to be it's got to be complementary, right?
Okay, and I see that Peter has put something up on the screen. So go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, so I think to answer this a little bit more directly, you can see on the screen here right now, this is the education and programming component of proposed investments. And as far as I can see anyway, there are a couple of programs that would kind of fall into that category. The first one being adult bicycle skills training, scheduled to start in 2023. An individualized marketing strategy. In other words, how can you as an individual learn how to walk and bike to and from your destinations? This is a carryover of a program that the city had about a decade ago. And I think actually it kind of fell by the wayside for a while. Talking with major employers within the community, e-bike strategy, and then on the next page here, student bike skills training, and this transit travel training program. So basically help learn how to use transit. So there are some operating costs within that over the 20-year period, basically starting next year from what I can gather. Is it going to be enough? It's, I guess, a little bit up for debate, but certainly the folks at the city have certainly thought about that and tried to address some of that anyway on a personal level.
All right, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Gord. So I have here from Kyle Davis, I guess, or Davis Kyle. Were you disappointed that there was no open option parking reform? So ending parking minimums in the transportation master plan. What about an end to the RU 123 zoning, defaulting the yellow belt fourplexes with looser lot requirements? Anyone like to address that?
I'll jump in and start. My answer is actually a little bit twofold. It's a yes and a no. I was somewhat disappointed to see that parking minimums did not change. However, in my opinion, I think that if you completely eliminate parking minimums, what you set yourself up for is the potential for a lot of circulatory traffic. And so there should be, within context, some sort of minimum parking supply. Now, that being said, particularly for key areas like our urban centers, the downtown, Pandosy, Landmark, that doesn't necessarily mean that each individual lot has X number of parking stalls there. That can get agglomerated and amalgamated into a single area that is walkable. So you drive to the certain location, let's say it's a parkade, and then the rest of your journey and amongst your trips within that entire area can be then done on foot or by bike or some other mode. Obviously, in terms of involving transit in that, if all of these major centers are very well connected with transit into some of our more residential areas, then there's no need for parking altogether.
So just to finish that off, so Davis, when I was with the city of Vancouver as their transportation planner, we wanted South Shore Falls Creek, a very high-end area, high income, beautiful, picturesque South Shore redeveloped railway yard, freight rail yard, to have minimal parking. We actually dropped along the lines of what Peter is saying, but we did it, and then people moved in that weren't part of the process. So the community hadn't been brought along. I was at a meeting where Herb Capozzi, which is a name folks Kelowna will maybe recall from history, stood up and ridiculed us for what we had done, because we said, you know, deliberately we haven't provided a lot of parking. So the developers were allowed off the hook. They didn't build a lot of parking. Instead, we've provided transit service. And it was like, no. Higher incomes, and in Kelowna, parking is extremely controversial. So it's always going to be a tension, Davis. It's always going to be a tension. Just to say though, you folks will have your opportunity for say, because the zoning bylaw is also part of parking requirements and standards. So get onto that Kelowna.ca website, have your say on the zoning bylaw that you want those parking minimums dropped further, or how you want things done. And I see you've got a comment about the zoning of densification. Yes, how we manage our growth and where we densify has to respect existing residents. It is controversial in the heritage area, where perhaps carriage houses, I've done a carriage house, that match architectural style are appropriate, but you can't carte blanche color everything the same paintbrush. It has to be done in consultation with the neighborhoods and the neighbors. It's a very good point you raise.
Andrea, anything you'd like to add?
In regards to the parking, I think we need to shift to people not parking on public streets before we're getting rid of the parking minimums. And that's what I've seen in other cities, is people have one parking spot and then 2 or 3 vehicles, and they end up all parking on streets, and we have the circular traffic, and that's a concern. So I think we need people shifting away from owning vehicles before we're getting rid of the parking minimums altogether, or just having on-street parking fees and passes required, because otherwise I'd just be afraid everyone would be parking in adjacent neighborhoods.
Yeah, I guess that was recently a controversial issue down in Vancouver, where they proposed, what was it, $45 a year to park your vehicle on the road, and there was an outcry. So.
Well, in all honesty, I mean, I'll jump back in here. I think that it's important to say that right now, okay, that on-street parking and off-street parking, but particularly on-street parking, is 100% subsidized by taxpayers. And so we're not anywhere close. If you want to take a look at the economic perspective of parking, we're not anywhere close to even coming in the ballpark of a cost recovery system for parking across the city. And so, you know, what they were talking about in Vancouver absolutely was controversial. But the reality is that, you know, there is such a huge investment in having to provide even a wider residential street just to accommodate parking on it by citizens, by taxpayers, that it's, you know, the economics of it have to change, in my opinion. We have to, if we really want to walk the walk and talk the talk of some of these goals and visions, you know, we have to start looking at that seriously and saying, you know, it has to be, if you're going to provide it, okay, and that's the if, that it's done at a minimum at a cost recovery basis.
You know what? I want to just jump into something Simon Grant has pointed out. It's such a complex system. Thanks for that comment. Parking on the road ended up costing more in labor for the post office. The line of travel that pay is determined with had to change to accommodate the on-street parking in the north end. So there is no doubt that tolls, road pricing, carbon taxes, or carbon pricing, whatever you want to call it, depending on your political stripes, works. The research is there, demonstrated. If people have to pay something, if you hit them where, in the pocketbook, they will use less of it. Water metering. That's what Kelowna did. Water meters. They work beautifully. Conservation. People can conserve. It's extremely controversial. This is why I said stronger leadership. When the floating bridge was built, the plan for the latest one that was finished in 2008, Glenn Clark at the time said, no new tolls, no new tolls. So one of the thoughts I had was, how about peak hour toll? Peter, I think you and I were talking beforehand, perhaps some peak hour tolls. Andrea, you mentioned road tolls or tolls of some sort. Yeah, we're going to have to make some tough decisions, people, but let's face it, when council and their staff polled residents said, we are prepared to pay more taxes for more roads. We are in Canada's road and car capital. So strong leadership. Are we going to do what people want or what people need? Classic planner tension. Who's going to be the first to step up and say, I'm your elected politician and I'm giving you what you need?
Okay, thank you. Tom W. is curious about if we're going to be pushing density, should we be perhaps thinking about whether or not we maintain the ALR within Kelowna? Does anyone want to address the agricultural land for housing question as a way to address density?
I'm hoping that Tom can just elaborate on that a little bit. Maybe Andrew, will yours, I guess, give a first answer, but I wasn't quite exactly sure what Tom was insinuating.
Well, I'm wondering if I can speak there. It's just that if we want to densify, I drive by golf courses, I drive by land which doesn't seem to be used for much in the way of agricultural purposes, and it causes sprawl. We don't have the densification. When I think about active transit and getting people to walk more, use transit, it does really depend upon density when you think about Europe and what they do. Is it worth the trade-off? I know some of this land is good arable land. Some of it, Mission Creek Golf Course and others may not be doing us a lot of good. So I'm wondering about that analysis.
Well, your hand was up, Andrew. It looked like you were ready to say something.
So I'm not going to weigh in on pulling things out of the agricultural land reserve or not. And I know John is involved in a committee on that. But I will say that Richmond probably has the worst outcome possible with a lot of land in the agricultural land reserve, in that it would be land that would have condos or townhouses on it if it was allowed, but it's in the agricultural land reserve. So it has what could only be called estates or villas. And that's just people responding to incentives. You can only put a single family home on the agricultural land reserve. We didn't have any restrictions on that, and we ended up without agricultural land and without dense housing. So I think it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. So Kelowna and other regions don't move towards that.
Peter, Gord?
Yeah, the cost, I mean, hey folks, who's gone out to try and buy romaine lettuce lately? I mean, we've got, or a chicken, right? So honestly, we need to save for the 100-mile diet sake. There is a transportation externality to transportation from further away for our food security, supplies to our carrying capacity. That's what that is. That ALR is our carrying capacity for our population. Just like Okanagan Lake, we have to be very careful. So I see and I feel the tension. What concerns me more about the ALR is you'll see many large lots in and around Kelowna that are underutilized. There's a large vacant lot right across from the mall between Fortis and Cooper. Been sitting there for decades, nothing going on. It's not productive. Why? Because the family that owns it is waiting for it to be taken out of the LR to be developed. And that is something, is a sin. It should be put into production for a local food supply to improve our resiliency and also look at us being better stewards of the ALR. Density can be done in many different ways. I don't know if you caught some of the pictures I was looking at from other parts of the world, Tom. We're not talking high rises needed because we've got ALR interspersed around. You know, 4-story transit corridors, the city's transportation and OCP, so the strategic plans the city has transit corridors where you're talking 3- and 4-story dwellings, multifamily units. And that's really the secret is responsible, equitable densification with a purpose. And yes, maybe there's room or spots for high rises. I'm not even going to talk about that, Tom. We don't need to worry about the density. The OCP actually set out where we can meet growth expectations, I guess the 30, 40, 50,000 people coming in by 2050. That's not the worry. To me, ALR is sacrosanct. Sorry, did I come across? Do you want to know how I really feel, Tom? Sorry, bud.
Oh, that's fine. That's great. I mean, I just wonder that maybe we need a tax on vacant land that just sits there and not being used for anything. If you're using it for productive purposes, great, then you get the break. But if it's just sitting there doing nothing, and then again, whether it's arable or not, I guess, but I suppose we need land that's sort of swampy, that captures water, that sort of thing. So just curious as to what sort of thought process are.
Well, John, you could probably echo me on this one. There already is an incentive, financial incentive to put your land into production, but the amount of revenue you need to produce each year, what is that? It's less than $5,000 for a 25-acre piece of land. I think it should be per acre of land you own as opposed to a flat fee, and the bar should be raised. And I think that's the key is it's about gross revenue. So there is some sort of incentive already, Tom. It's not enough at the moment in my mind.
Well, and to that point, and Simon's point here that just came through recently, I think the sort of added point and the tactic has been for years, there's a lot of these vacant parcels that are adjacent to built form, and the tactic has been by developers to sit on that land, make it non-arable, and then eventually get the agreement to put it out of the ALR because it's no longer arable land. Right? It's a long-term strategy that's been used for several decades, and unfortunately, that's why we see all of these remnant parcels. But in terms of following up Gord's rather strongly worded message, I would just echo that and say, yeah, I think the food security just in the last month alone, if that doesn't sort of concrete it for you with everything flying off the shelves, fresh vegetables, all that sort of stuff. We need to be way more resilient. So I think ALR land is one, and quite frankly, I would add all of our public right-of-ways. So what we consider a street right now into that category for trying to make more arable land and grow fruit and vegetables to be more self-sustainable.
John,
can I jump fun to? Well, we're running on time, and I would hopefully get another question or two. And I would certainly love to keep talking about agriculture because I do quite like it, but I'm going to resist the temptation to say anything. But I'm going to bring up one thing that is, I think, quite important too, that from Fran P. who essentially, I guess, is asking about mix between pedestrian and cyclists and e-bikes, because it's not just on the motor vehicle roads that we have safety issues, but we also have them in these multi-use pathways. And yeah, I've been scared by e-bikes, and I've probably scared pedestrians, and so I've been lucky enough not to have collisions, but there's risks there. And what should we do to manage those risks of the different types of users on these multimodal pathways that we are building?
Gord, do you want to jump in, or should I?
Well, it's really not rocket science to manage risk on the Abbott Street corridor has a separate sidewalk from its active corridor. The Dutch have for decades been doing this. It's just you actually have to allow for the space. And as we can address this on all classes of roads, major and minor, we won't need to build additional traffic lanes, especially if Andrea and my dream of, whether it's interregional, intercity rail and BRT, you'll manage growth by taking cars off the road and creating more livable spaces where you can put a bike path and a sidewalk. And also, let's not forget about greening. We need our canopy. We need our carbon sinks, folks, as well as our corridors for street lights and fire hydrants and things like that. So it comes back to perhaps the first question as well, education. The red or the bike paths, please stay off them. And so it really is us working together as a community and a good system, a good, well-managed network.
Hey, Peter, Andrea, would you like to throw anything in on this one?
Yeah, I'll jump in and just kind of echo what Gord said with a slightly different twist. It's about trying to provide separated spaces. So really slow speed, like walking speed. So 5 to 10 kilometers an hour. If you're wobbly, Fran, and you feel like that's about as fast as you can go, then you kind of mix in with that space. If you're sort of an average cyclist to a little bit faster on an e-bike, 15 to 30 kilometers an hour, then there should be a dedicated space for you, and then a space for vehicles, but all three of those would be separated from one another.
By the way, the conflict points are still going to happen, John. Sorry to interrupt, Andrea. They will happen. That's where you need to worry about separating in time and space, either lowering the speed, right, at conflict points. I'm just going to point again to the Dutch. They've done a lot of work and research on this. We're learning there's a really, really good, the first city Kelowna crossing where they've got a bike corridor, a pedestrian corridor crossing a road. If you want to look at it, I believe it's the intersection of Pandozy and Lake. And I'm really proud of what I see there. So well done, Cameron and crew at the City Hall for that one. I hope to see a lot more. That includes some ramping up onto the path so motorists would know to slow down, they're crossing something. So there are ways to do it. And engineers are working on this, and we can only get better. And I see nothing but positives as we pursue this in the city. Andrea, apologize, go for it.
I think really echoing what both Peter and Gord have said, it's about separating users, but it's also about thinking about how to use public space. So instead of using public space for cars to park, we can have more public space for separating cyclists and pedestrians, and what's the best use for that. And especially as we shift more towards active transportation, more people are using it. How do we want to be dedicating that space?
Okay, thank you. And we're going past the hour and a half that we were planning. So I'm going to pick the one question here that seems to be a nice wrap and going beyond just transportation, what about environmental preservation? What role does that have in our thoughts about transportation planning?
Well, I mean, it undergirds everything. Okay, there's two ways to approach this. You run out of air, you die in 2 minutes, and same with water in a couple of days. If we don't protect the environment through zero emission vehicles, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we're going to kill it. And in turn, because we live as part of that ecosystem, we perish as well. Our backbone of our economy is tourism. People are coming to Kelowna because it's gorgeous. They're like I said before, many of my friends bypass Kelowna. They will not come here because of the congestion. So air quality and degradation of environment is huge, huge in so many different ways to our existence.
Andrea, anything you'd like to mention there?
So something that didn't make it onto my slides was thinking about noise pollution. So we want to encourage people to be living in density. And Eve brought up that when we have electric vehicles, it will be more pleasant to live close to transit corridors. So definitely kind of park type or natural environments is important in terms of environmental preservation, but also reducing noise pollution, both for wildlife, but also for livability for us. So I think it all is pointing towards reducing noise pollution. And then one of the things I was most disappointed about in the transportation master plan was a new road that was going to connect to Highway 33 and go through where the Okanagan Trail is, because that's natural preservation, but also just a nice separated space for cyclists. So I think a lot of this is complementary in terms of preservation and also making active transportation more appealing for us.
Yeah, 100%. For every new unit that's put up in the suburbs of the city, for every street that's built, right, is a degradation of the natural environment. I think we've gone through a lot of that now. And what we've done, it's going to be tough to try and fix and retrofit. There are certain things that we can do, but I think this kind of speaks to the point I was trying to make in my presentation that 75% mode split for autos in 20 years just isn't good enough. We need to do better, and we need to do better sooner, in my opinion. Because it affects air, it affects water, horses, it affects land, and everything else of the like. So
Okay.
I think it needs to be a much higher priority than we're placing on it right now.
Okay. Well, thank you, speakers, for your presentations and for answering questions. And thanks to everybody in the audience for coming. We've certainly had at one point almost 40 people who were participating, so that's fantastic. And thanks for those of you who hung on past our hour-and-a-half planned time. I'll also say a big thank you to John and Joanne from ICER for setting this up, making sure the Zoom worked. Thanks again, and I guess that is about it. Hopefully you've learned something, and hopefully that learning will also lead you to keep paying attention to what's going on in this city, because what you do with this knowledge in terms of responding to the calls for input that the city regularly puts out on things like the Transportation Master Plan, showing up for the meetings and the public open houses, And even doing things like attending public hearings that the city has and council meetings where these things go up is a place where your voice can be heard. And likewise, you can always contact city council and the mayor by email, arranging meetings, et cetera. And that's other ways to get involved. So when you take those kind of steps, generally you're able to have quite a big impact. It does take some effort, but part of what we're hoping to accomplish with these kind of events is to provide you with some more knowledge and with the encouragement that there are people who care about these issues and that will help you to decide to get more involved. So thanks again.